Hey friends, it's Just the Gems. I'm Brandon, and look, everyone is talking about Zelda. It's a fantastic game. I'm already pretty far into it, and by that I mean in terms of hours, not in terms of the critical path, because there are so many things to do. But the release of a new Zelda game brings back the classic argument/thought experiment. What if Zelda was a girl? I know I shouldn't start videos with jokes that will easily confuse people, but I can't help myself. Anyway, what I'm saying is, for a series that's named after this important lady, pretty much only the friggin' Philips CDI gave her any games of her own, and that's horrendous, right? So I've been thinking about female main characters in games. Considering the fan base for video games is basically split 50-50 male and female, very similar to the population of the world, interestingly enough. Well, it's strange that more games don't star lady types. Since this is a JRPG appreciation channel, I figured I'd take a look at the best JRPGs to star female characters. Now, there are definitely more games than this. If your favorite JRPG with a female main character doesn't show up, tell me about it in the comments. Maybe I've just never heard of it. Or maybe I hate it, and its exclusion is a personal attack against you. And while you're thinking about it, would you consider subscribing? I do game reviews, top 10s, collection videos, and just generally spend time gushing over JRPGs with you all on a pretty regular basis. A subscription would mean a ton. Also, will you hit the like button for me too? It tells YouTube that I don't suck. Thanks. Without any further ado, let's get into the top 10 JRPGs with female main characters.
It's the Just the Gems. Top 10 JRPGs with female protagonists.
In America, our first foray into the Star Ocean universe was through Star Ocean: The Second Story. A pretty bold title in a world of hesitant marketers who want to make sure nobody feels they're going to be missing out by starting anywhere but Chapter 1. Star Ocean: The Second Story, I'm just going to call it Star Ocean 2 if that's okay. Is that okay? If not, let me know down in the comments. But Star Ocean 2 actually gives you a choice between two main characters, a man and a woman. Naturally, given the topic, we're going to focus on the latter, a young woman named Rena, who lives on a backwater planet called Expel. She runs into Claude, a space guy from Earth who was teleported to Expel under mysterious circumstances, and she believes he's some sort of hero of legend because he has a laser gun and he dresses funny. Rena, of course, has a mysterious past, which you almost kind of expect with a JRPG protagonist. It's one of the reasons I think she's better than Claude, because we freaking know who his parents are, for crying out loud. Where's the mystery there? The game itself is basically an action RPG with random encounters. Battles play out on this large, wide field, so you have plenty of room to run around and go nuts. Are there too many random encounters? Of course there are. This is a 90s JRPG, but at least the battles are interesting. On top of that, the game has a bunch of other pretty unique mechanics. Characters you recruit all have different specialties, like musicianship, or writing, or cooking, or pickpocketing. I just did all those gestures. There's a bunch of others, and you can use those skills to create a bunch of different useful items. Like, a character can write a novel and get it published, and then receive royalties from the sale of the book. It's weird, but honestly it's pretty cool. I think one of the biggest selling points is the private actions system, which sounds more risque than it is. Essentially, when you enter a town, your party can all split up and go their separate ways. You can find your party members just around town doing various things, and then you have an opportunity to sort of build rapport with them, or ruin your rapport with them depending on what you do. These mini scenes all contribute to guiding you toward one of 86 possible endings, which, in a world where Chrono Trigger's 12 endings seemed insane, is just downright bonkers. Of course, these are really just slight variations on the same basic things, but still. I kind of question the logic of packing an 80-hour JRPG full of different endings like that. I mean, like, who has the time to play through this thing multiple times to see them all? But it is kind of cool. Anyway, if you're in the market for an appealingly 90s JRPG with a cool female lead, Star Ocean 2 is an excellent choice. It's available on the original PlayStation and in a slightly revamped and widescreen presentation on the PSP. Check it out. This was it, Square's big, breakout, cinematic RPG. Their words, not mine. People were crazy about the CGI cutscenes in Final Fantasy VII, well, let's give them a game with even more. But Parasite Eve was more than just flashy movie scenes, fortunately. It was a dark and pretty compelling horror movie of a game in its own right. The protagonist is Aya Brea, and she's a cop. The kind of cop that somehow finds a way to carry a gun in a dress like this. Does that mean she's no nonsense? I would say so. I would say there's very little to no nonsense going on in the vicinity of Aya Brea. We begin on Christmas Eve in New York City, and Aya is attending the opera with some no-name doofus for a date. Everything's going great, until it isn't. Specifically when one of the performers causes everyone in the audience to spontaneously combust. Well, everyone except Aya. Turns out this magical performer is possessed by Eve, some sort of mitochondria, which is a thing I learned about in school, I'm pretty sure, but that I've since kind of shuffled into the dusty back corners of my brain to make room for useless trivia about video game soundtracks. It's a cellular thing, I think, mitochondria. Anyway, Aya has to solve the mystery of Eve and stop her from killing the entire human race. I mentioned this is like a horror movie, and relatively speaking, it's almost more like a survival horror game with RPG elements than anything. It's turn-based, and the battle system lets you target enemies within a radius around you, which then depends on the type of weapon you have equipped. But while there's an active time meter that fills up, you're not forced to just stand in place and let the monsters wail on you. You can essentially roam freely within the battlefield in between your turns, trying to dodge enemy attacks and whatnot. Admittedly, I think this would get a little bit monotonous after a dozen hours or so, but fortunately, that's where Parasite Eve's brevity is a benefit. This is a tight, intense JRPG experience with one of the toughest lady MCs in JRPG history. Check it out. Stop booing, come on, stop. Look, I know Final Fantasy X-2 gets a lot of crap from the Final Fantasy community. I don't think much of it is deserved though. Yes, there are some spectacularly cringy moments in here. The opening performance made me cringe so hard that my body literally turned inside out, just... But if you can push all that aside, you've got a really strong Final Fantasy game underneath. And the first, and so far only time, the entire game has been handed over to an entirely female cast of main characters. You've got Yuna, of course, the heroine from Final Fantasy X. She's a little bit older, a little bit wiser. She's wearing booty shorts now for some reason. Then you've got Riku, her cousin, and another former party member of Tidus's 10 crew. And finally, because subtlety is not always Square Enix's forte, we have the angsty-looking goth character whose name is Pain. Yes. These three make up the Gullwings, and they're sphere hunters. They're looking for clues about Tidus who, and I guess spoiler warning for a game that's older than probably many of you watching this, who sort of dies at the end of Final Fantasy X. Or like he was never really alive, or he was alive in the distant past, and he was summoned to the present to help. I don't know, all right? It's confusing. I don't know what's going on in Final Fantasy X. But anyway, at some point after 10, Yuna found a sphere that seemed to show a recording of Tidus, so she thinks there might be a chance he's still alive somehow. They also have a partner named Shinra, and you can find a picture of him all grown up in Shinra headquarters in the Final Fantasy VII Remake. And I don't care what Motomu Toriyama says, that is confirmation that 7 is a sequel to 10. Period. The end. The storyline is, well, let's just say, it wasn't the thing that made me care about this game for a change. It's not bad, it's just not nearly as good as its predecessor. What is good, though, is the gameplay. This is a fully refined and expertly executed rendition of the classic active time battle system. Gone is the turn-based system of 10 proper. Now your characters move around the field of battle and attack when their meters fill up, and it's frantic and really a lot of fun. On top of that, the game uses an improved job system, which every third or fourth Final Fantasy likes to trot out when they can't come up with any other good ideas. The jobs in this game take the form of dress spheres, and they allow the gals to change their outfits. I feel like this... I don't know, I feel like the attitude here was something along the lines of ladies be shopping, but maybe I'm not giving them enough credit. Anyway, changing their outfits changes their abilities. So you've got classics like the White Mage and the Black Mage, and then you've got more esoteric ones like the Gun Mage and Floral Falal. Anyway, the point is, if you never gave this game a chance because the booing voices were too loud for you to concentrate, I'd recommend you take it for a spin. It's way more fun than you might be imagining. Blue Reflection Second Light is the most recent game on this list that I've played and finished, so I'll try to keep myself from gushing about it. Also, I have a full review planned with a friend of mine, so I don't want to say too much. Anyway, this game is about magical girls fighting with the power of emotions to save the world from nameless gods that have existed since long before time. It's weird. You play as a girl named Ao, and I'm literally just realizing just now, after dozens and dozens of hours playing this game, that her name means blue. Ao means blue, and the game is Blue Reflection. Never underestimate how stupid I can be. Anyway, you're a normal high school girl named Ao, who kind of wishes she could be unique or interesting in some way, but she's not. She's just super basic all around. One day on her way to summer classes, because she's not even a particularly great student, she suddenly finds herself in another world. This world is a high school on a tiny island, which sounds like hell to me, with nothing but endless ocean on every side. There's 3 other girls living there, and to the best of their knowledge, they've always been there. They have no memories from before. Ao does, however, and so she would like to get home. Thank you very much. They're able to travel to a place they call the Faraway, which is this mysterious land that seems to be made up of memory fragments. Here they start to learn that they have the power to turn into reflectors, which is basically their Sailor Moon powers, if that helps it make sense. Eventually, more girls start showing up and joining the team, and everyone has to struggle to find out where they are, why they're there, and what the purpose of it all is. I suppose the original Blue Reflection could also be on this list, but rather than flood the zone with Japanese schoolgirls, I'm just going to give the nod to the sequel because I feel like it captures all the mood and vibe of the first game and then amplifies it many, many times over. Musically, visually, the worlds you explore here are just stunning. Every dungeon in this game is based on fragments from each of the main characters' memories, so exploring is far more dynamic and fleshes each character out as you go. It's a really smart way of merging gameplay and character development. The battle system is incredibly intense. Its closest analog might be the Grandia series, where your characters and the enemies are moving along a timeline at the bottom of the screen. You have opportunities then to cancel or delay enemy attacks if you time your attacks just right, but obviously the enemies can do the same thing to you. I'll admit, it's actually a little bit challenging to master it, but once you do, it makes even regular combat really fun to engage in. The characters too, they're all super interesting and well developed. You might find some of them sort of samey in appearance. Like, yes, this girl also has an asymmetrical haircut, but it's asymmetrical on the other side, see? So different. But looks aside, their personalities are endearing and distinct, and you have so many opportunities to see them interact with each other. Their friendship feels completely sincere and really earned by the end. If you're put off by the Japanese schoolgirl aesthetic, well, I don't know what to tell you. Try and get over it and play the Blue Reflection games. They're very, very good. Okay, put down your pitchforks. You're gonna poke someone's eye out. I mean it. Drop it. Yes, Final Fantasy XIII is divisive. I've even felt some of that myself. I played this one when it came out. I got about 2/3 of the way through it, and I put it aside. I didn't go back to it for years. When I finally did, I think I was able to appreciate it for what it was. It was far from perfect, but I would say it's equally far from awful. Does that make it mediocre? Well, sure. It's a mediocre Final Fantasy game, which honestly puts it well above so many other great games. That's just the power of Final Fantasy. Lightning also has her fair share of detractors. She seems kind of standoffish, too rude, too disconnected from the events happening around her. I don't know if she's seen that way just because she's a woman or what, but I don't see her personality as fundamentally that different from Cloud or Squall. There was just an era when brooding MCs were very in, and this game came during that period, what can I say? Having a female protagonist in a Final Fantasy is a rare enough occurrence that I think even Lightning's presence makes the game worth giving a shot. I would never say that that's completely reason enough to play a game, but I feel like it should bump it up a little higher on your interest list. The rest of the characters are, interesting and varied in their own right, and they have some nice dynamics around race that, they manage to say some important things without being super soapboxy, which is good. The plot is hard to follow. I think their ambitions were far greater than their execution here. If you take the time to read through all of the encyclopedia entries, you'll find a really fascinating world with tons of intriguing concepts strewn throughout, but most of that isn't really communicated directly through the game, so most people just miss it. And I get it, that's not great storytelling. You can aim that sort of criticism at Final Fantasy XV as well, but that's a story for another day. And just for the record, Final Fantasy XV is in my top 5 Final Fantasies. Mic drop. The gameplay once again drastically changed between major numbered entries. Abandoning active time, abandoning turn-based, abandoning whatever the heck Final Fantasy XII had. Like, computer programming? Is that basically what the battle system was in 12? Programming? I don't know. This time, I mean, I guess they still call it active time, but it's very different. As your active time meter fills up, you can add different elements to it, attacks and stuff like that. The longer you build up your bar, the more attacks you can string together. The real crux of it all comes down to the paradigm system. You can set different paradigms to your characters which change their abilities. So for example, a commando is going to focus on attacking, while a ravager is a mage that casts spells to spike an enemy's chain gauge in an attempt to stagger them. Staggering enemies is really what you want to be doing. You're only going to get really high raw damage numbers on an enemy that's staggered. So there's a lot more strategy here than simply smashing the X button until all the enemies are dead. Do we say cross button? Did they say it's cross? I'm gonna say X. And look, if you like video game music a lot, you've probably heard of Masashi Hamauzu. His compositions for Final Fantasy XIII, especially the battle theme, are just incredible. His style is so unique and compelling. As much as I do find that I like Final Fantasy XIII these days, I'm still not crazy about its sequels, though those definitely still star female protagonists and could find themselves on a list like this. Your mileage may vary, but I wasn't blown away by either 13-2 or Lightning Returns. Still, as a mainline entry, 13 is worth your time despite what some people on the internet might say. Here's another entry where you can choose to play as either the male or female lead, and unlike in Star Ocean 2, I feel like both characters are still pretty great choices here. But we're focusing on Milla for today. Milla is the incarnation of the Great Spirit Maxwell, and she can control the 4 Great Spirits at will. Well, for a bit. For plot reasons, of course, she loses that ability and she's forced to team up with a bunch of humans to save the world. If you haven't played any of the Tales games, you're honestly fine to start with basically whichever game strikes you the most. Xillia seems like a great place to begin in my opinion because it has a super charming cast of characters and a pretty well-defined battle system. The story involves an ancient conflict between humans who are friendly with spirits and humans who want to, I don't know, eat them? Not exactly eat them, but like use them to make stuff. I guess they want to do to them what the machines in the Matrix did to us, kinda. Anyway, the bad humans are separated from the good humans by a giant barrier, and the bad guys are trying to tear it down so they can get to all those sweet, sweet spirits. Naturally, you're on the good side, so you've got to stop them. Now, about the battles. If you're completely unfamiliar, I'll give you a quick rundown. Tales games are all action-based, though encounters will still take place in a separate battle screen. So you control one character while AI handles the rest, and things do get pretty hectic. You can button mash your way through some of the simpler battles, but against the bosses, you really want to start devising some strategies. Knowing how to time your special attacks and when to get in position for your healer's area of effect spells, those are all really important skills to develop. Like I said, you can start the Tales series anywhere because for the most part, each game is a completely standalone entry. Now, Tales of Xillia did actually have a direct sequel in which you do not play as Milla, but instead control a silent protagonist, which was a first for the series, and it's something I'm glad they haven't gone back to. And while we're on the subject of Tales, sort of similar to Lightning, the main character of Tales of Berseria is angsty and dark. Unlike Lightning, I think Velvet has a much stronger justification for being that way. She's betrayed by someone she trusted and ends up A, possessed by a horrible demon, and B, stuck in prison for 3 years. Does not sound fun. Don't blame her for being sad. Eventually, she escapes, of course, because we wouldn't really have much of a game otherwise, and she sets out to get vengeance on the people who wronged her. As a Tales game goes, this is a pretty dark setup. I mean, all of the games cover serious issues to one degree or another, but this one definitely has the most grit. In terms of battle system, if you're familiar with any of the 3D Tales games, you'll probably be comfortable here. There's some new gimmicks, naturally, like every game has, like the soul gauge, which depletes as you use special attacks. You can recharge it either by waiting or by stealing souls from enemies. And you charge the soul gauge up enough, you can unlock a super powered up version of your character. So there's some decent variety in there to keep things interesting, even for people who play a lot of Tales games. One thing I'll say about Tales of Berseria, it's technically a prequel to the game Tales of Zestiria, and I personally got a lot of enjoyment out of playing Zestiria first and seeing how the world used to be while playing Berseria. Definitely 100% not a requirement. The games are 1,000 years apart. But still, it's an interesting detail, and the Tales games don't often connect like this, so in my opinion, it's worth checking out. I read an interview once with some of the creators of Final Fantasy, and they specifically said that they don't really see Final Fantasy VI as having a main character, but that it's more of an ensemble story. Now, I hope you'll pardon my French, but that is a complete load of malarkey. I'm fine with respecting authorial intent, but I think audience interpretation is just as important, if not more so, and the way most people see it, Final Fantasy VI has not one, but two main characters, and they are both kick-butt ladies. First is Terra Branford. The game begins with you following Terra as she escapes enslavement by the Empire that's taking over the world. They're trying to use her magic powers for evil naturally, and so she ends up joining a resistance group called the Returners, which is, I think, in retrospect, not a super intimidating name for your violent insurgents. What does a returner do? Return something? I used to do that with video games at Blockbuster every week, because I'm old. Personally, I'd go with something like the Emperor Slayers or something. But anyway, the story does sort of shift focus to the Returners' battle against the Empire, but Terra is pretty much always front and center. This continues up until roughly the halfway point, when the world gets destroyed. Sorry for the spoiler. Yeah, this game had the guts to blow up the world at the halfway mark. After the catastrophe, the planet's in shambles, and the MC focus shifts to Celeste Cher. Now, up until this point, she's been a supporting player. She was formerly a general of the Empire's army, who then defected to the Returners. It becomes Celeste's job to travel around the world and reunite all the many characters so that they can stage an assault against Kefka, who, in case you didn't know, is the best Final Fantasy villain ever. Sorry, Sephiroth fans. Seph is great, don't get me wrong, but Kefka wins for being just purely maniacally evil. I won't bother talking a ton about the battle system. It's classic active time, the series introduced in the 16-bit era and carried through the 32-bit era. Every character has a class with a unique ability, but all characters are able to learn magic through the use of the Espers, which are not only your summons, but also play just a hugely pivotal role in the plot. The graphics are some of the best of the 16-bit era. The music is Nobuo Uematsu at just the peak of his creative genius. The story is incredibly moving. Look, it's been like 30 years, but I still have nothing but warm thoughts for Final Fantasy VI. It's a treasure, and the fact that it only places as high as number 3 on this list should tell you something about what's to come. I've expressed my love for Xenogears and the Xenoblade games on this channel before. Unfortunately, out of those, only Torn of the Golden Country has a female protagonist, and I'm not sure if that even counts as a full game or not. I mean, I guess it does. But I'm gonna give this number 2 slot to the best lady protag in the Xeno universe, Shion Uzuki from the Xenosaga games. Shion is an enormous dork, which is one of the best things about her. She runs contrary to basically all the rules that we seem to have about lady main characters. She's nerdy, she's analytical, she doesn't fit the mold of a poster girl, so already she's portrayed so differently than so many women in games. And I think this is to her benefit because her character is actually super interesting. She starts the series out as a sort of singularly focused research scientist, but as time goes on and as she gets more and more involved in all the crazy conspiracies going on in the universe, she's able to kind of step into the role of hero more easily because of how she's developed over all that time. The Xenosaga games are famous for their really complex story, but they're maybe just as famous for how much of a mess they are. What was originally planned as a 6-part series by director Tetsuya Takahashi had to be pared down to 3. I'm guessing due to lack of sales. So already you see a huge condensation of the plot, particularly in the final game. For some reason, despite all 3 games appearing on the PlayStation 2, the team at Monolith Soft just could not settle on a graphic style. So the characters look distractingly different between games. And maybe it was just a scheduling conflict or something, but the voice of Shion in Episode 1 and Episode 3 does not appear as Shion in Episode 2, despite most of the cast remaining the same. Sometimes Xenosaga is a hard series to love, but I love it. I think I love it because it showed what happens when a genius writer and director swings for the fences. Even though he didn't quite hit a touchdown, he still managed to kick a goal, and that was enough to get in the Stanley Cup. I think I got all the sports metaphors right. Let me know in the comments. I was always a little bummed that Takahashi never got to finish his magnum opus, but now that Future Redeemed has officially canonized Xenoblade as part of the Xenosaga universe, I'm more hopeful than ever that this story can finally continue. Some of you who know me have been waiting for this one. From the moment you saw the title of this video, you were like, yep, Brandon's gonna gush about Trails in the Sky. Of course I am. I'd take any excuse to gush about Trails in the Sky, but on the topic of JRPGs with female protagonists, I'd have to turn in my Trails fan card if I left this one out. And it sits at number 1 on my list for a reason. Not only is Trails my favorite series of all time, but its main character is the best of all the previously mentioned characters, and it's not close. Okay, enough beating around the bush. The main character of Trails in the Sky is Estelle Bright. Is it a little on the nose to name such a cheerful and optimistic character essentially Bright Star? Maybe. But I'll forgive the cringe because Estelle is fantastic. She's a bracer in the kingdom of Liberl along with her would-be love interest Joshua. Bracers are essentially arms for hire, taking on jobs for people that are willing to pay. In the first Trails in the Sky, Estelle and Joshua have to make their way around the entire kingdom as part of their initiation, and all along the way they have to solve problems as they gradually get wrapped up more and more in all this major political intrigue. God, the Trails games are just the epitome of slow burn storytelling. They are comfortable hinting at a significant storyline element and then leaving it untouched for several games. Not hours, games. They plant the seeds of the story early on and at various points, and as the player you get to experience the joy of watching them sprout at just the right time. Graphics are decidedly old school here, not quite as charming to me as a classic like Final Fantasy VI or Chrono Trigger, but still nice in their own way. The game that seems to come the closest to its style to me is Xenogears with the 2D characters on the rotatable 3D backgrounds. That was a short-lived style in games, thank God. It's not great. The music, though, is spectacular. The Falcom sound team does not do a great job of highlighting their individual composers' talents. I honestly cannot name a single one of them, but the material they produce is just consistently top tier. Battles are unique in the JRPG space too. Each battle takes place on a battlefield in which your character can move around within a certain radius, as can enemies, and all of your attacks have different ranges and areas of effect. You can launch a spinning attack at a group of clustered enemies and hit them all at once, or you can launch a spell at a single enemy far out of range of your normal weapon. So positioning becomes super important, not just for attacking, but for defending as well. It's a system that Falcom has continued to refine as the series has gone on, but the roots of it began here and the roots are solid. Okay, I've talked about the game enough. I don't want to spend the next 5 minutes going on and on about how cool Estelle is, but I'm gonna. Her optimism is an antidote for the dourness of so many JRPG protagonists. Even among the generally upbeat Trails series protagonists, she reigns supreme as the most positive and outgoing. But beyond just her positivity, she's also incredibly strong, and watching her growth as a character, especially over the first 2 games, is just really powerful. I'll have more to say about the Trails series soon. We've got Trails into Reverie coming out in a couple of months, but until then, I'll leave it at that. Play Trails. Go. Now. Anyway, if you've made it this far, would you consider subscribing if you're not already? It would mean a ton to me. If you liked it, would you click like? I really, really, really appreciate it. It tells YouTube that I'm cool and that they should recommend me to people like you who are also cool. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And until next time, bye. First is Tara Branford. The game begins with you following Tara as she escapes. I've expressed my love for Xenogears and the Xenoblade game. Why am I saying Xenoblade? I never say that. Xion is an enormous dork, which is honestly one of the best things about her. She runs contrary to all the rules that we seem to have about main... The game that seems to come the closest to its style is Xenogears with the 2D back... The game seems to... I can't say this... And all of your attacks have different ranges and areas of effects.